welcome everybody. We are in a very intimate environment here, so feel free to ask a lot or any questions. I'd be remiss if I didn't say a few words about Sydney. When you start anything new, and in my life I had the pleasure to kind of start in an area in Canada involving snowbirds, which are seniors that travel to the US and other parts of the world, and involving travel insurance is a whole new area. And I got experience with something new when you kind of create the medium and you do it as you go. And I've kind of seen this with crowdfunding. And when you look at certain mediums out there, CrowdFund Beat, it's just amazing what they're doing to help educate, inform, and build that environment. And I encourage you to go there. I go there regularly. In fact, I really like their video library, in that from various conferences around the world, people are posting their videos, and you can find the latest content on whether it's P2P lending or something else, and get informed and not even be there or have to pay the price of a ticket or accommodation. I think bringing the community together, and you think community local, I think community global, national, continent-wide, and it's just amazing what's happening. I had the pleasure of, for 2 years, writing for the European Crowdfunding Network, a legal extract, boring to many, of what the rules are for crowdfunding. And it's a publication that looks at 30 regimes, and there's a law firm that's associated with that association that does all the editing or otherwise to have it one kind of clean document. But just amazing how jurisdictions around the world are looking at how to do this. So this is not just a Canadian issue or phenomenon or trying to figure this out. This is happening, as you know, in the US, Japan, Brazil, the UK, and different countries are at different stages. And it's wonderful seeing how different countries are looking at how they do it in other jurisdictions, and does that work for them. And what you'll find is a constant theme is to see how we adapt it. And here we'd say made in Canada solution. But unfortunately I can't say that because we don't have a Canadian regulator, national one. We have various provincial regulators. And so each of them are looking at what is the right balance for their province. And you'll see that reflected in today's presentation. So I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a shout out that Sydney has been tireless in rounding about different people around the world and creating this environment and community to share information. So if you want good information, I think it also has information from Italy, Germany, the US, etc. So I encourage you to go there. So before I get going here, how many people have heard of crowdfunding, understand it? You have? Okay. Anyone who's kind of very new, they're still trying to figure things out, a few people? Okay, no worries. So I will try to do a balance between not going to a very basic level and not at a higher level. So is this the clicker here? Okay, so I'm a securities lawyer at a law firm in Toronto called Castles Brock. I'm also now the vice chair of the Private Capital Markets Association of Canada. They involve companies that are looking to raise money. They involve exempt market dealers. They are registered to sell securities across Canada. It's called the exempt market of the private markets. I also have the wonderful pleasure of being a member of the Ontario Securities Commission's Exempt Market Advisory Committee, which has been looking at a few years of how to raise capital. And when I was asked and joined in the fall of 2012, the first meeting I walked into, it was all about crowdfunding. And in April 2012, Obama just passed the Jobs Act, where they were just they passed a framework for crowdfunding, and now they're looking at, and they have implemented different titles to the Job Act. So I'll start off with the typical disclaimer. These are my own personal views. They're not from our clients or otherwise as a lawyer. So with that, we'll kind of get into what is today's agenda. Basics of securities law, just so we understand like what is the basic framework that's governing what this is, like how it works or otherwise, and how companies and portals do what they do. Some of the funding problems for SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, and raising capital. Very quickly, what is non-equity crowdfunding? I think most of us know the different types: donation, rewards, repurchase. Look at a few really cool examples, even a Canadian example. Then we get into equity crowdfunding. I really like 4B, definitional issues, because I think what I find in my experience when I speak to different people about what's crowdfunding, they all have their views what it is. Some people think crowdfunding is Kickstarter. That's it. And then you have to kind of build a conversation from there to realize that there's actually equity and non-equity crowdfunding. We're going to get into that. So part 5 is we're going to talk about how crowdfunding is legal today. you can do it today in a regulated manner. And there's proposals out there that are looking at a very specific crowdfunding exemption. So the reason I mentioned I was writing something in that European Crowdfunding Network publication is that if you want to kind of see what other countries are doing, it's a good way to go to sleep quickly. But there might be some interesting information there so you can see the different structures. But what you see is all the countries either have very specific laws that exist and they're trying to call it crowdfunding, or they created a specific crowdfunding framework, as the US did with Title III, in terms of their framework that then went to FINRA and the SEC, who put out some more specific regulations, et cetera, that haven't been finalized yet. Okay, we're going to talk about these proposed ones across Canada and certain jurisdictions. I'm going to go very quickly through a comparison, only of the select features. Sydney will have the slide of CrowdFund Beat, so you can post it if you want to get a copy of it there. And then we'll talk a little bit about peer-to-peer lending. How many people have heard of peer-to-peer lending? Okay, good. Many people haven't, so we're going to kind of get into that. It is gaining some traction in Canada. Obviously, it's a monster in the US. Everyone's heard of the Lending Club. Prosper, they've done huge IPOs, billions of dollars are raised. It's gigantic in Europe, especially in the UK, et cetera. Government, private equity, VC firms are all getting involved, and that's kind of near banking, which might be a topic later today. And then we'll give a quick recap of what's going on in Canada. Then we'll talk about what are the opportunities for investors, you and I, putting money into these opportunities, for issuers who are looking to raise money, and then the portals. And then pre and post crowdfunding, there's a whole list of certain legal matters they have to pay attention to when you move forward in equity crowdfunding, and then some information sources. Okay, so unlike the US, there is no national securities regulator in Canada. It's a constitutional matter. We have securities regulations split up amongst the different provinces or territories, and they work together. And there's different mechanisms for them to work together, and more often than not, they meet in an umbrella group called the Canadian Securities Administrators, where they kind of look at different proposals in terms of securities laws and looking to do two things: harmonize them to make sure that they're the same, and nationalize them, make sure that everybody does that. So looking at crowdfunding, they are looking at harmonizing it, but not necessarily nationalizing it, because not all the securities regulators have bought into this framework, or they're looking at it, but there has been 6 regulators, including Ontario, that have specifically looked at a specific crowdfunding exemption. In terms of prospectus requirement, well, what is that? What does that mean? If you're a company raising money, you just can't pass the hat and go around and say, you want to put some money into my company. You have to be mindful of what are the securities laws that allow you to do that. So the securities laws start off with you have to have a prospectus, except if you're exempt from having one. And many people have heard of the credit investor exemption, probably selling to credit investors, we'll get to that. Private issuer exemption, there's a number of them. But if you don't fit squarely in one of them, then it's an illegal trade. You can't do it. So you have to be very mindful that you fit in a particular exemption. And that's why they call it a closed system. So you can raise money for yourself, for your company, but if you're kind of an intermediary and you're doing this all the time with some sort of regularity, continuity, and frequency, and you might get a commission, you look like a dealer. So a lot of people, ask, like, when do you need to be registered as a dealer? Well, usually there's a number of factors you look at, but obviously if you're getting a commission, that's a telltale sign that you are probably a dealer. But the reason we're asking this and looking at this is when you sell securities on the online as a portal, you're bringing investors and issuers together, so you look like a dealer. So that's why the registration regime kicks in, and you have to make application to be registered here in all those jurisdictions that you're going to be carrying on business and soliciting investors. So you may decide to have a portal in 2 jurisdictions, let's say Ontario and Quebec. We have to make sure that you block out and no other investors can come into those jurisdictions. So the U.S. concept is they have intrastate crowdfunding, like within the states, as opposed to federal securities legislation. So in there, they have to be pretty mindful of how they block others if they're just doing it within a particular state. Okay, so why is it the OSC and other regulators looking after this? Everyone talks about a funding crisis, and there's different reports out there, and you speak to different people. It's very difficult to raise capital. In Ontario, I don't really look at it as a funding crisis, as it is, in fact, but as a securities lawyer, I look at it as a prospectus exemption crisis. And then why Ontario is looking at this is, other than a private issuer, which you can take money from a certain group of people, like family and friends, etc., the next real major exemption that's available is maybe a credit investor. So a lot of people try to raise money from credit investors. There's nothing in between there. And we'll look at a couple other exemptions that are available in other provinces. So Ontario's looking at this as, how do they make it easier to raise capital in a manner that protects investors? So it's not all one-sided, that it's all about how to raise capital, make it easy, and not really caring about investors. It's a balance, and the regulators are struggling with trying to get the right balance because they want this to work. And the reason they spend a lot of energy and time on this is they're looking at the jurisdictions, they're studying it, they're trying to do the right thing. The worst thing that could happen, even though I'm probably the first one saying, are we there yet? Are we going to release the proposal? Is you want to make sure it gets done right, because you don't want to come out and then 3 or 4 months later there's some disasters, gets the headlines, and everything that has gone into this is for naught. And that's obviously the concern. So we talked about the new prospectus and registration frameworks. There's a very specific one we'll be looking at for crowdfunding that Ontario, Quebec, and some other provinces are looking at, as opposed to existing ones. So what's non-equity crowdfunding? It involves raising capital online from contributors. Again, we're contributors, not the word investor, for campaigns or projects. Don't really refer to them as issuers or companies. It does not involve the issuance of securities at all. So you obviously, how many people heard, obviously, Indiegogo, Kickstarter, Rocket Hub? Okay, so it's pretty simple. So think of that mentality. Oh, I just go to that site and just put on my video and put on a campaign and off I go. That is not how securities work. So some people that come from that space think, oh, I just have to do a really cool technology platform and then I can get people who need money to put them online and off I go. That is not the world of securities. And we'll get into why it's not the world of securities in a moment, but it basically, you have to get your mindset that that's not how it works. And I found the greatest challenge with people is that they come from that non-equity world and then they grapple with and struggle with securities laws that have always been out there. And they have to embrace them and realize that it's a regulated environment. And you have to understand what the rules are for the prospectus exemptions and for registering a portal. And it's a full contact sport. So you have to be mindful of what all the requirements are. Just saying, oh, if I get it wrong, I'll just fix it. It doesn't work that way. So Canadian non-equity crowdfunding portals include Fundraiser, Greedy Giver, SOCAP. The NCFA has a little directory there if you want to go to that website. It's a national association where they list the different portals, equity, non-equity, etc. It's pretty good to look at. Types of non-equity crowdfunding, look at real quick: donation, rewards-based, pre-purchase. So think of donations, Cure for Cancer, etc. We've all gone online and contributed money for different causes, etc. That's crowdfunding. It involves many individuals giving or donating small amounts of money, and you might get a thank you note or otherwise, or maybe even a tax receipt. Rewards-based, rewards or perks. So they want you to give them money, they will give you something back. It could be a t-shirt. In film, it could be an acknowledgement that you were a contributor. Again, just to use film because it's easy. Like they may give you an acting part as an extra. There's all sorts of stuff that they can give you. Maybe you want to participate in a phone call with the director and find out what they're thinking behind what was involved in putting this together. Veronica Mars is a popular one that got a lot of notoriety in a good way, that raised capital online, etc. Indiegogo, indie films, they have kind of their origins way back when, and was it 2006, 7, 8, around there when they got going. So that's basically what rewards-based is. They want to give you a little bit of reward or perk, but you don't own anything. You feel good. Okay, so pre-purchase. So what's pre-purchase? Well, I'm trying to build this microphone and I have no money, so I'm going to talk to you all about this microphone and I hope you'll give me money in advance so I then can build the microphone and then sell it to you perhaps at a discount or otherwise before I take it to market. This is very interesting in terms of the non-equity part, because this does something very important, and it says this model provides validation of the user want. How many people go out there and say, hey, I think I'm building something or raising some money to do this. What do you think? Well, most of your friends will say, I think it's great, good luck, right? Or, honest people say, oh, it'll never work, the naysayer, never work, never work. But the validation through pre-purchase is incredible, because it is what it is. Before you actually raise any equity or gone into other institutional large amounts of money, even like the pre-purchase, the perk-based, rewards-based, it's a type of validation that the crowd is interested or has some traction whatever your idea is. So real quick, here's an example pre-purchase Oculus Rift, just absolutely incredible. They did its technology 3D. The gamers loved it. It was in Mashable, all sorts of magazines, getting a lot of good write-ups. And at the end of the day, they raised a ton of money. Well, they raised, sorry, hang on, how much did they raise here? A couple million, I think. 2.4 million, 9,522 backers. It was so cool. Guess what happened? It was acquired by Facebook for $2 billion. Incredible. So I remember I was in Palo Alto at, was it a year ago, 2 years ago, when this happened, and the big talk was, this is not fair. How is it that, you know, the person that owned it got all this money and we didn't? We backed and we started, and it was an interesting discussion because as a lawyer, well, they got what they bargained for, but there was some social injustice that they should have been on that hockey stick ride and got part of that $2 billion. And that would have been a great success story. But anyways, that's an example of someone that went from from non-equity to equity. This is very cool.
It should be noted that nobody got it. Oculus glasses.
Okay.
Just saying, it should also be noted that none of the donors actually got the glasses, right? Because when Oculus sold to Facebook, they sold the assets, not the liabilities. So not only were all of the donors frustrated that they didn't get to participate in the upside, they also didn't get the glasses they wanted.
Wow. Okay, I didn't realize that. That's interesting. I play hockey, and you also have water after the game, I think. Yes, you do. So this water cooler thing was really cool. It was the coolest. It's called the Coolest Cooler. And the video is incredible when you look at how they put it together. And this was just a phenomenon. And 62,000 backers, $13 million raised, and this basically beat out Pebble Watch. And this was last year, and they haven't delivered it yet. I don't have mine. But because all of a sudden, when you talk about use of proceeds, the regulators look at how much money you're making. They want to know, what are you going to do with it? Have you planned it through? Some of the problems with this is if someone gets some monster amount of money, they haven't planned for it all. And what I'm getting is constant updates, all in a good way, saying we've upgraded your battery, we're giving you a better blender, and all these other things. I'm saying this is great, and would you like to have an extra Dolby speaker? And I'm thinking this would be really cool in the dressing room. So I'm saying yes, yes, yes. So I'm waiting for it. So I think maybe sometime at the end of the summer I'll be getting that. But this is a really cool product that's out there. Now it was, now it is the second most funded campaign. Myriad of features, and obviously they're communicating, what's happening. This actually came back. Pebble Time came out, totally played on the Apple Watch coming out, and this reclaimed the throne. 75,000 backers, raised now $19 million on Kickstarter, and that's incredible. And so Eric Menchikowski is from Waterloo. Everyone, just Google his story and what he's done, but he's very successful now in the whole wearable technology. Look at this. The campaign began on February 24th and reached its goal of $500,000 in just under 20 minutes. That's incredible. That's the power of the crowd. So what is equity crowdfunding? It involves issuers raising capital online by selling securities to investors through an online portal. Basically, securities laws intersect social media. We'll have another gentleman talk about social media and how that works. So when you look at what's happening in selling securities on the internet, especially equity crowdfunding, you need someone who understands securities laws. You have to understand, obviously, how to run a compliant portal and all those other matters. You also have to know how to corporate finance and onboard companies. And two is you need to understand social media. Otherwise, you're not going to get the eyeballs and issuers. You have to have a really good social media campaign. And I'm really excited that someone's going to talk about that, because that's not a topic that's discussed enough, because that's going to really get campaigns and others noticed. And it's interesting, if you look at the non-equity campaigns, some of them companies have right down to the science of how to develop a social footprint and get your brand out there before you even get going. Okay, so the last quote there, the difference, another way of remembering the soundbite, it's a difference between equity and non-equity is it's about owners, not donors. Owners are going to own a security in a company. It's not about donating and feeling good about it. That's the major difference conceptually. So in terms of the crowd and crowdfunding definitional issues, I think I was grappling with that because you just look at the word crowdfunding, you see crowd. So you say, how is it that someone is selling securities on the internet to credit investors, rich people, and they call that crowdfunding? And I was one of the people that asked that. Because especially in the US, it's like, crowdfunding this, crowdfunding that. and then institutional crowdfunding or other vocabulary that they use. And really, what I sum it up is, the umbrella term is it's really selling securities on the internet. And then once you do that, you can break it down in terms of whether it's like what prospectus exemption they're using, and that's where you hear different terms like accredited crowdfunding or just straight up crowdfunding. But they're doing it under existing prospectus exemptions, so I wouldn't get too hung up on the word crowd and like I did at one time and just say this can't be, we should call it accredited, not crowdfunding, investing or crowd finance. And you're just wasting your time because everybody knows it as equity crowdfunding, so might as well go with the flow. So how can Canada engage in equity crowdfunding? Under existing securities laws or creating a specific framework, and Canada is doing both. So to some people, if I said equity crowdfunding is legal today, they just would raise up their hand and say they can't be. That's why the OSC and others are looking at a proposal. Well, it goes back to what I said earlier, is that you have to look at existing securities laws, and can somehow that be done? And the answer, it is. Just like it was done in the UK. CrowdCube did that under existing securities laws at the time. Things have changed and advanced since then. And there's other jurisdictions that are looking at existing securities laws in order to do that. So two prospectus exemptions that we talked about earlier is the accredited investor exemption. A new one I haven't mentioned yet is the offering memorandum exemption. So real quick is you have to ask yourself, where's this exemption available? Remember I talked about they need to be harmonized and nationalized. So we'll just have to kind of have that mental map in our head and saying, where is this allowed? The beauty with the accredited investor exemption is it's available across Canada, provided you're an accredited investor, and we'll get into that in a moment. And you can raise unlimited amounts of money from the investor, and the issuer can raise up to unlimited amounts of money. There's no maximum cap on it. So the premise is like, why do these people get a break under securities law? Because it's assumed that because they're wealthy and they're putting in that amount, well, they can put in $1, but because they have certain income or asset thresholds that they're rich enough to fend for themselves, they have a certain level of sophistication, they can withstand a massive loss, etc. I know in the US that they're still looking at the definition of accredited investor. The regulators across Canada have gone through that exercise. They have left it alone in terms of there's a fear that if the index, etc., that they would basically, a lot of companies wouldn't be able to raise money. It was a very difficult issue and question to deal with, because if you're talking about 4% and you're making it harder, 2%, how much will that impact capital raising when 90% of capital raised in the private markets comes from the accredited investor exemption? So at the end of the day, what they did do is they added a risk acknowledgement form, which now everyone has to initial and sign to make sure investors, even they call them retail investors, even though you say, well, why would you call a wealthy investor a retail investor? But that's what sometimes they refer to, that they're making an informed decision. And they made some other changes to the definition of who an accredited investor is. And that is effective as of today, May 5th. So there you go. Change the securities law happens as we speak live on CrowdFunding. Okay, so who are these accredited investors? There's a financial asset test, like how much money do you have to be rich to qualify? Financial assets basically means cash, securities, or the cash surrender value of your life insurance policy over $1 million. The net income test, you made $200,000 in the last 2 years, and you expect to make that in the future, like you haven't been fired from your job. So this is how you qualify. Net assets over at least $5 million. So the second exemption, which I want to share with you, which is quite important, which let me just start off with is, when you look at this picture, it's available across Canada except in Green and Ontario. Ontario's looking at it now. That's the exciting thing. They've been looking at it for a while. They published a proposal in terms of trying to adopt a form of it, and it ended up that different provinces split in terms of having different views. So you're not getting anything nationalized or harmonized, but they're all looking at it, and I'm hopeful that in the ensuing months they'll be coming out with something on that. We'll get to that in a moment. So this is just kind of a quick recap of some of the summary of what the exemption is and how it works. But the bottom line is you can raise an unlimited amount of money. And the other key part for investors under the OMA exemption is they can invest as much as they want, except if they're an eligible investor, non-eligible investor. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so what is this exemption? To keep it simple, you have to have an offering document, which is kind of prospectus-like, and you have to have another risk acknowledgement form that says you're probably going to lose all your money. And this is this document is not like 2 pages. It's prescribed, and you have to have a lot of information in it. So I kind of liken them to two models, the BC model and the Alberta model. So the BC model is you have the prescribed form of offering document, you have the risk acknowledgement form. You can basically sell it to anyone over 18. Okay, if you're an issuer. If you're a dealer, obviously you can, but you have to make sure that it's suitable. That's the BC model. And if you add in an exempt market dealer doing that online, and you can sell to the public, what do you call it? Crowdfunding. And BC has been holding out that they believe that they've been able to crowdfund for years. And they believe that that's the way it should be done. And they've not bought into, at least publicly yet, the proposal for crowdfunding. They're not a party to it. They're looking at the startup exemption. But I want to start off, that's the basic BC model. Most of the other provinces that you can see, including Alberta, it's the same except one thing. They distinguish between eligible and a non-eligible investor. An eligible investor can invest as much as they want, provided they meet the definition. And we'll get into that. An eligible investor is like a baby accredited investor. If you're not, if you're not an eligible investor, you're limited to $10,000. Okay, so an eligible investor, again, income asset test. Net assets exceed $400,000, $75,000. They're not monster insurmountable thresholds. So out west, this exemption is quite popular in terms of capital raising. But in terms of the proposals out there that different regulators are looking at, they're looking at putting in caps or even changing the definition. Again, each regulator is trying to get comfortable with what structure works best for its residents. The third one is that it works today is the startup exemption. And this is from the FCA site in Saskatchewan. And they actually have a very specific startup exemption, which we'll get into. But the interesting part is the portal is not registered. They submit some forms, but it's not registered and going through a whole formal process to become an exempt market dealer. Very contentious issue. And now, in terms of balancing investor protection and fair and efficient capital markets, you can only raise up to $300,000 in 12 months, and any investor can't put more than $1,500. So you see that when they create these structures, they're putting in these mechanisms to try to make it balanced and fair. But again, not all the provinces have bought into that. 5 of them, Ontario is not. In terms of the proposal that came out, 5 of them, including Quebec, have. Saskatchewan obviously is examining this, and their model is being used as the base for this. So who's selling securities on the internet today? There's SeedUp, there's Optimize, there's the funding portal, there's BrightSpark, there's Mars, there's Open Avenues. We can talk about real estate. They're not there yet, but Tim will talk to you about where they're at. So what's happening is what all of these are in order to do this is they need to be exempt market dealers. So the fact is, you're going to say, how can you say that crowdfunding is happening when you said it's a proposal? Because think of the two paths. The one path is to an exempt market dealer putting its deals online and selling under existing prospectus exemptions. Okay? The other one is a very specific model that's a lighter approach where they put in caps, etc., to make it work, similar to Title III on the Jobs Act. That's the difference. Okay, so these proposals I'm referring to came out in 2014. The comment period ended more or less in June. The startup one, we're still waiting for them to come out with something on that. It's the 5 jurisdictions, including Quebec, Saskatchewan. Equity crowdfunding, there's been some updates. The OSC and other regulators are looking at this. Many are anticipating that they'll be coming out with something in the next few months. They've been messaging that. Obviously, there's the OM exemption. Ontario's looking at it. But Alberta and some of the other provinces put out some tweaks that they're considering. We're hopeful something will come out on that. And the accredited investor exemption, they just came out as of today, as I said, with the new amendments. So that one's kind of, tick, all done. Yes, sir.
Why are they called exemptions?
Because you start off when you raise money, you have to have a prospectus. And if you don't, then you're exempt from the prospectus requirement. And then you go, well, what are their exemptions? Well, there could be like, 42 or how many there are. There's probably more. And you have to see, do I fit this one, fit that one, or the other ones? And you have to strictly comply. That's why they're called exemptions. Same thing with registration. You have to be registered as a dealer advisor unless you're exempt. And then if you're not exempt, then you can't do it unless you get registered. Okay, so you can see, remember I talked about that funding gap, etc. You can see now with what we're talking about, you see a proposal where you go from startups to the proposed equity crowdfunding, to the offering memorandum, to accredited investors. So very happy to be in Ontario and part of the Exempt Market Advisory Committee, that they're seriously looking at this, even bringing out like a family and friends exemption. They're creating more exemptions to make it easier to raise capital, but doing it in a manner that's protecting investors. And that's why, even though it may be frustrating that sometimes it takes long, but they are consulting, they're having town hall meetings or round tables, and also they just can't go back and do it. They then have to consult with their other regulators to try to come up with a harmonized national approach. Otherwise, they get criticized that they haven't been doing that. They just don't want to go it alone. So there's a lot of dynamics that's going on in here that you have to realize that it's kind of like trying to do this is like trying to move an aircraft carrier in an ocean. It's not going to turn on a dime. It takes a while to get there. It's all part of the process. Okay, so proposed equity crowdfunding exemptions. The green, those are the jurisdictions that are looking at it, 6 provinces. You can only raise up to $1.5 million. Investors are limited to $2,500 per investment, up to $10,000 in a 12-month period. The caps. So we can debate all day long whether it should be $3,000, $5,000, etc. This is what they put out there. At the end of the day, I think most people are just saying, let's move forward with something, and then if they need to be indexed or changed or otherwise, let's just have this work and get that out. So in the comments that have come out, I've not seen a lot of pushback on many issues. I know they had some restriction on real estate, which Tim will speak to in terms of the crowdfunding model, even though he's an EMD, but there's a concern that perhaps that was a bit far-reaching. I shouldn't identify a particular asset class and restrict it from crowdfunding, because there's some really cool opportunities that can be done in real estate and crowdfunding. Okay, so the other proposed startup one, exemption option 4. There's 5 jurisdictions. Again, we talked about $300,000 in a 12-month period, or $1,500 every 6 months. You can only invest up to $1,500. I won't go into these slides, but these are available, and it goes kind of like a head-to-head comparison, what are the differences between the offering memorandum exemption, the equity crowdfunding proposal, and the startup proposal. So we talked about the numbers there, the caps, restrictions on advertising and offering documents, how that all works. It's all in the proposal, but this is kind of a high-level summary of what's required. Like, for example, audited financial statements, you don't need the startup exemption. An equity crowdfunding, they have different requirements where you need audited or not. And the OM exemption, generally, you do need audited financial statements. Generally, the rule of thumb is the more money you're raising, the more likely you are you're going to have audited statements as a global statement in terms of when you look at these different frameworks around the world. Okay, so to recap, so can you do equity crowdfunding in Canada today? The answer is yes. Saskatchewan, you can do it under their startup exemption. We talked about existing exemptions, the credit investor exemption, the offering memorandum exemption. We talked about proposals. We talked about the proposed equity crowdfunding framework and the startup proposal. So peer-to-peer lending, also known as marketplace lending, matching borrowers with lenders. So let's have an example. So I'm a lawyer, I have a credit card, and I definitely have more than $19,000 on it. And I'm paying probably 21% last time I looked, but I don't look. So I just asked my wife to see that it gets paid every month. So I am perfect for credit card companies that pay these high fees, but I don't want to pay these high fees. So imagine if you can go to a site where they do my credit score and otherwise, and I'm anonymous, don't know who I am, they may have occupation or something, and they say, we give this person a credit score, and there's different ways this can be done. One's an auction where people bid what they would bid for that. That's a very cumbersome process. One portal had tried that, but it was too much effort to get people to do that. Just keep it simple. So the portal may assign, let's say, 9% to me. So I'm looking at this as a borrower, and say, or say issuer, and saying, I'd love to get a 19% credit card fee down to 9%. And it could be that you put in a few $1,000s, and then the money comes to me as a loan, and then the portal basically matches that. That's peers lending to a peer. That's one form of peer-to-peer lending. I know Joseph will talk about different varieties of peer-to-peer lending, but that's kind of at a basic level where it kind of grew up, where people are helping people. And it did this in lending, and kind of the origins, if you look at the Lending Club in Prosper around 06, 07, 08, when there was a crisis of capital with how to get money to people, the banks completely restricted for obvious reasons. This became a really, really interesting way for people to get money to other people in a way that was efficient or otherwise, and it caught on. And it's not just in the US, in the UK and other jurisdictions around the world. Now, in terms of, well, it's loans, it's not a security, so I don't need to worry about securities laws. Why are you talking to me about this? The answer is, without getting too complicated, is the definition of a security has many branches, and one of them is called an investment contract. And more or less, when in doing something like I just described, it will come out to being a security. So if it is a security, then the securities laws kick in, and then you need to have a registered portal if they're going to do this, etc. Now, is the OSC and the other regulators looking at this? Yes, they're aware of it, they've looked at it, but there's not a specific proposal out there. There has been excellent and recent proposals in the UK, as well as I believe in Australia. So if you wanted to kind of brush up on how these work or otherwise, or even just go to a site that do these types of things, you can quickly find out how it all works. So securities law does not have an express exemption for registration or a prospectus exemption for P2P lending. And so you have to try to fit it in developing this under existing securities law. So let me just say, in doing this, there's a higher barrier to entry. There's a lot more thinking, there's consumer protection laws, etc. So you haven't seen all these P2P sites out there, but you have seen a few recently in the Canadian landscape that are poking their heads up. So US Experience Lending Club went public. I see it says December 10, 2015. That can't be true. Must be a typo. Unless we're going to put that's in 2009. Community Lend. There's a whole wonderful exemptive relief order that sets out the whole analysis of how that portal would work. And what's amazing about that was done at a time before crowdfunding even hit. They were just looking at, Prosper the Lending Club, and these folks came out there and spent a lot of time, money, and effort trying to make it right. They set up their program, and they were going, and it was accredited investors only, so it's a very small 4% they had engaged that audience, but very difficult to engage. The good news of this story is they had another aspect of their business that kicked in, and they ended up stopping doing this because they made more money, I understand, from their other business, so they kind of stopped this. So this was the first P2P portal that I'm aware of in Canada that was approved, that went forward, and then stopped on its own volition. Okay. Some examples. Group Lend, I believe, is out of Vancouver. Borrowwell, Fund Through. Again, if you look at their structures, and again, I'm not experts on these, but what I'm finding is they're raising a bunch of money, and then on the internet, they're trying to attract borrowers. That is different than you're trying to match people coming in who are, lenders, you and I, and borrowers. So, in other words, they may be raising money through accredited investors, you're putting it into a fund of some sort, or a company, and then the company's making the loans. It's a different spin to it, so when you have to look at these structures, you say, how are these people doing this? And that's what I do, is I always look at structures, and it's interesting how creative people can become. But those are three out there if you want to find out what they're doing. So real quick, investment opportunities. Now, you've heard of things like the democratization of investment. What does that mean? I mean, is that just noise, just a buzzword people are using? What they're saying is, we can't access the capital markets. Why? Like all these private equity firms, etc. Obviously, the reason is they're not sophisticated enough, you lose all your money, etc. So the democratization is creating a way to allow the public to access it in a legally compliant manner. And that's what they mean by democratization of investment. So they can invest in a variety of industries. Just think of the internet. I mean, you can sit here in Toronto, you can be Vancouver, Thunder Bay, Calgary, whatever. You can light up online and you're looking at deals across the country. You're not restricted by geography, or Palo Alto is known for this is where these guys got funded in the Starbucks coffee shop or something like that. So many Canadians will go and hang out there, and somehow they'll find their dream, or the dream will find them. The internet it's a level playing field that everyone will see it for what it is, which makes it pretty exciting. Efficient, transparent manner, interact with other investors, including angels and other sophisticated investors. They can directly engage with founders or fundraisers, supports entrepreneurialism. And I truly believe another positive benefit of all this is it's going to increase the entrepreneurial IQ of Canadians. What it takes to survive or not in raising capital in a company. It's not just giving money to a big public company, because economies here in the States and in Canada, they thrive on startups and medium-sized businesses. Some go public, some don't, but most of them are not. So where are they going to get their money if the banks aren't giving them money? This is the next step, and the internet is going to enable that, so people can, look at it and make their own comments, make their own views, have their own views or otherwise, or engage with one another in a good way or a bad way. I call this investment infotainment. I say that in a good way because it's investing, it's informational, it should be fun. When you go to your broker now, it's very static, stock quotes, etc. You're not engaged. So you want to go somewhere you can watch videos or webcasts. Go to CrowdFund Beats, it gives you some really cool videos. You want to learn. You want to be engaged. You don't want to 500-page document and get blurred with what it means, etc. And your broker saying, I'm in and all my clients are in, so you should be in too. Then you say fine, and then you get your account statement, it goes up, and you're not into it. So what this is doing, it's engaging in investors at a level that is, I would say, indescribable, but you can, but intuitively, intellectually, emotionally, when you know someone or the idea, like you could work in the oil sands in Alberta and Fort McMurray, and see the next oil technology, understand exactly why this is the next thing, when I in Toronto I have no idea. So that person's saying, if I'm not an eligible investor, it's not under the OM, why can't I invest? Issuers, a new source of capital, they feel that they can get on the radar screen, but there's no radars on the internet screen, so people can see them and they will either survive or not. We talked about crowd validation, we talked about crowd intelligence or lack thereof, the herd mentality over the cliff. You can take your spin on that one. The crowd is either good or it's bad. But the fact is the crowd is getting information out there and you're assimilating it all and obviously making your own informed judgment or decision based on a number of variables. And obviously we're talking about getting supporters, etc. And in Canada, it's available for public or private issuers. So continue on here. So what's portals? The new dealers in town are the portals. They're the new dealers. So you'll see that the exempt market dealers, if they light up their deals online, then people can see it. My view is existing exempt market dealers are best to use that as a referral network and not disintermediate, because I do believe that the market's not mature enough in terms of immediately putting $5, $10, $20, $50,000 in. No one trusts it. It's like eBay started. So you're going to have a combination of both bricks and mortar people selling it, as well as maybe the internet to light it up to increase awareness. So I believe that the next evolution of crowdfunding, whether it's through dealers, is using it as a referral network to dealing representatives to then sell and educate and have a dialogue. And eventually you'll find that this massive, what is it, Gen X, Gen Y, I keep forgetting the letters, they live on mobile. I mean, I think I have more conversations with my kids on their phones than I do in person. They're in the same house. But that's how they look and talk, etc. And that's what's happening. And that's why this has to happen. It is happening globally. So what are some legal matters? I'll just leave you with getting ready to do these things. Obviously involve professionals. It could be your social media expert. Someone will come talk about it. Lawyers, can't get rid of the lawyers, or accountants, and you need them because they need to help you be accountable and make sure that no misrepresentations or otherwise. So you're not Kickstarter, you're not just putting something online or otherwise with a cool video. You have to think it through. So what are the things you have to do? You have to prepare offering documents. You have to incorporate a company. You have to do due diligence. It could be that you have to be clear who the shareholders are. Like, do you have 100 shares out there or 1,000? Like, you better know that if you're bringing new investors and you think you're diluting 5 or 10%, you better get those numbers right. So this is work that you need to work with lawyers or others to help you. Obviously, if you do your ownership of your IP, intellectual property, you better get that right, because once you light it up online, everyone's going to see it. So make sure that you have that protected or covered off. Obviously, minute book reviews, which are basically where all the companies' constituting documents, they call them, like their bylaws, etc., resolutions, are all in this book. You got to make sure it's current or otherwise. You may want a stock option plan, advising on social media and marketing. I think that's very important, because you just can't out there and spam. We have new legislation, anti-spam laws that kicked in. They're very, very draconian. It's one of the most draconian in the world, believe it or not, and you just can't email everybody. In the US it's different, so you have to be very cognizant of these things. So, like I said, it's a full contact sport. You got to be alive to what's happening here, pay attention. It's just not passive and I'll learn, I'll pivot, and I'll do it as I go. It doesn't work that way, because you'll be out of business through the regulators or otherwise, or a lawsuit possibly. So portal work, there's a lot of work to set up a portal, and we're going to talk to one vendor today who actually has an online portal that is licensing the technology. That's very specialized to understand that work, how that works in a legally compliant manner. It's getting them registered, it's making sure they know what their job is. So there's the work that has to be done there as well. And continuing on, post-closing, well, at the end of the day, you have to report the trades that were done to the regulators. There's stuff that you do after you close the deal, like maybe even talk to your investors. You want to make sure that you have that all set up in terms of how you're communicating. One of the biggest criticisms of non-equity is they raise the money and they never hear back from what happened. They may get a footnote that didn't work out, thanks guys. And it's like, okay. So just wrapping up here, there is some information sources. There's a little article on crowdfunding I wrote a while ago. But obviously, top of mind, there's CrowdFund Beat. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.